My name is Ruth Rogers. I'm 70 years old, a widow, and I live alone in the house my late husband and I built brick by brick here in Oregon. I spent 4 decades building a small chain of bakeries from the ground up, and when I sold them 5 years ago, I promised myself I'd spend the rest of my life enjoying the fruits of my labor. I have one son, Alex, 44, and his wife, Annie. For years, Alex was my pride and joy, the kind of boy who called every Sunday and fixed my leaky gutters without me asking. But after he married Annie, something in him changed. Last Thursday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping tea, when they walked in without knocking. I thought it was a surprise visit. Instead, Alex grabbed my wrists and shoved me back into my chair. His grip was so tight I felt the bruise forming. Annie reached into her bag and pulled out a pair of scissors. My stomach dropped. I screamed before I even knew what was happening. Alex held me down as Annie came from behind, the cold bite of metal against my scalp. "Hold her still," she barked. The scissors hacked through my hair in jagged chunks, locks sliding onto the tile. I twisted, but Alex slammed me back, his face inches from mine. Annie's laugh was sharp and triumphant. "Maybe now you'll look like someone who needs our help." When the last lock hit the floor, Alex shoved a pen in my face, his voice like ice. "Sign it, Mother. Sign over the money now, or next time it won't just be your hair. I'm so glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and comment the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story has reached. And if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community." I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just stared at the hair scattered across my kitchen floor. Some strands curled in on themselves like they were trying to hide. Others stretched long and straight, glinting under the morning light. The smell of metal and split ends hung in the air, sharp and bitter. My wrists throbbed where Alex's fingers had dug in, but I didn't rub them. I didn't move. Something inside me had gone very still, like the world had cracked open under my feet, and I was standing on the edge, staring down. I picked up one lock of hair and held it for a moment before letting it fall. No words, no questions, no tears, only a quiet withdrawal that I knew would echo louder than any scream. I stood, swept the hair into a neat pile, and dropped it into the trash. Then I made another cup of tea, my hands steady, my face calm. But inside, I knew this was the morning I stopped pretending my son still loved me. This was the moment everything began to change. The kettle whistled softly as I sat at the table, hands wrapped around my tea. Outside, Oregon's early spring sky was still pale, the air holding that damp morning chill. But my mind was somewhere else, tracing the long, winding road that had led me here. I've been on my own since I was 42, when my husband, David, died suddenly. No warning. One moment we were making Sunday pancakes, the next I was planning a funeral. I had Alex in college at the time, and no safety net except the small bakery we'd built together. So I worked. God, did I work. For decades of flour-dusted aprons, pre-dawn mornings, and late-night inventory counts. I built that bakery into a small chain, each one like another child I'd raised. When I sold them 5 years ago, it wasn't for extravagance. I saved. Every penny. For security. For family. For Alex. Back then, he was my anchor. The kind of son who'd drop by on Sundays to fix a loose step, who'd sit with me on the porch swing and talk about his dreams. He called me Mama, even at 30, and he meant it. And then came Annie. At first, she was polite in that practiced way, like she'd read somewhere how to charm a mother-in-law. But small things started to change. Alex called less. Our conversations felt measured. And sometimes when I'd walk into the room, they'd stop talking altogether. I told myself it was just marriage adjusting his priorities. That's what I believed, or wanted to believe. Because looking back now, I can see it clearly. Those little shifts were the start of something I never thought possible. The slow erosion of trust, drop by drop, until there was nothing left. Alex wasn't just my son. He was my safe place in the world. When he was little, he'd pick wildflowers from the empty lot down the street and present them to me with both hands, beaming like he'd brought me the crown jewels. In high school, he walked me to my car after PTA meetings, scanning the parking lot like a bodyguard. When my tire blew on the highway in the middle of a rainstorm, he left work without asking his boss and drove 40 minutes just to change it himself. Even after he moved into his own apartment, he'd show up on Sundays with a bag of my favorite pastries from the bakery downtown. "Just making sure my girl's fed," he'd joke, giving my shoulder a squeeze. That was Alex, my boy who always called, always checked in, always made me feel like I mattered. But the wedding changed something. After he married Annie, it was like she took my son and locked him away somewhere I couldn't reach. The calls grew shorter, the visits rarer. When he did come by, his eyes darted to her for approval before he spoke. And when I hugged him, it felt like hugging a man made of stone. I told myself it was just the adjustment to married life. But deep down I knew I was losing him, and I didn't know how to get him back. It started small, almost too small to notice. One Sunday afternoon, Alex and Annie came over for lunch. I'd made roast chicken, the way Alex liked it when he was a boy. We were sitting at the table when Annie leaned back in her chair, smiling that polite but sharp smile of hers. "You know, Ruth," she said, cutting into her chicken, "it's amazing what you've managed to save from selling the bakeries. Most people your age wouldn't even know how to handle that kind of money." I laughed lightly, unsure where she was going. "Well, I've always been careful," I said. Alex chuckled, but not in the way he used to. "Careful's good," he said. "Just don't be too careful. I mean, what's the point of all that money if it's just sitting there? Eventually, it'll be ours to look after anyway." The way he said ours made my fork pause halfway to my mouth. I brushed it off at the time, telling myself it was just a clumsy joke. Annie would make little comments at family dinners, sliding them in between bites of roast chicken. "Oh, Alex, your mom's house is so big for one person. Must be hard to keep clean at her age." Or, "You've done so well, Ruth. I can't imagine what it's like to have all that money just sitting there." Always said with a smile. Always just making conversation. But then came the suggestions. "Wouldn't it be easier if you just sold the house?" Annie would say, glancing around my kitchen like she was assessing square footage. Or, "You don't really need to drive anymore, do you? We could take care of that for you." They were always framed as kindness, as ways to make my life easier. But the longer it went on, the more it felt like they weren't clearing my path. They were quietly building their own. Then there were the times she'd wander into my kitchen and open cupboards without asking, moving things around like she was searching for something. I'd joke, "Looking for treasure?" But she never laughed. She'd just shut the door and change the subject. One afternoon, I overheard her in the hallway talking to Alex. She didn't know I was there. "I'm just saying, if we had that house, we could finally start the family we want. She doesn't even use half the rooms." Alex didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He just didn't say anything. That was the first time I felt it, the shift. The realization that I wasn't imagining things. Something was happening behind my back, something bigger than offhand remarks. I told myself I'd keep an eye on it. But the truth? I was already in their sights, and I didn't even know how deep it went. That Saturday, Jane came by to drop off a pie she'd baked, blueberry my favorite. She's been my friend for 20 years, the kind of friend who knows when you're avoiding the grocery store because you've been crying. We sat at my kitchen table, steam rising from our mugs, and she asked, in that careful way of hers, "How are things with Alex and Annie?" I told her they were fine, that we'd just seen them last week. But Jane's eyes didn't soften. She leaned forward, lowered her voice. "Ruth, I've heard Annie talking at the farmer's market. About your house. About your savings. It didn't sound right." I laughed it off, shaking my head. "They're family, Jane. People talk." But Jane didn't laugh. She just reached over, squeezed my hand, and said, "Sometimes the people who can hurt you most are the ones sitting at your own table." I changed the subject, but her words stayed with me long after she left, sitting heavy in the room like a shadow I didn't want to see. It was a Sunday afternoon when they stopped by. Annie had that too bright smile, the one she wears when she's about to sell you something you didn't ask for. We were halfway through a pot of tea when she leaned back in her chair and said casually, Ruth, darling, at your age, holding on to all this property is just selfish, don't you think? Dead people can't spend money. You know, it would make a lot of sense to put part of the property in our names. Strictly for tax purposes. I blinked. For tax purposes? She nodded like it was the most logical thing in the world. It would protect your assets, keep the government from taking too big a bite. Before I could answer, Alex chimed in, his tone warm but rehearsed. Annie's right, Mom. We just want to make sure things are streamlined. Streamlined? For who? I smiled politely, the way you do when you're deciding whether to laugh or throw someone out of your house. I'll think about it, I said, even though I already knew my answer. They dropped it, but as they left, Annie's hand lingered on the doorframe. Just don't wait too long, Ruth. Opportunities like this don't last forever. It wasn't what she said. It was the way she said it, like my home and everything in it were already hers, and I was just in the way. It didn't happen all at once, but things kept on changing. At first, Alex just seemed busy. He'd answer my calls on speakerphone, Annie's voice chiming in from somewhere in the background. Then, little by little, the calls stopped altogether, unless she was there. When I called on my own, it went to voicemail. When I tried again, Annie answered instead. Always cheerful. Always promising Alex would get back to me. He didn't. I noticed other things too. Whenever Annie was at my place, I never got messages left for me in my absence. A neighbor mentioned a barbecue at their place the weekend before. I hadn't been invited. Annie brushed it off when I asked, saying it was last minute. And you don't like crowds anyway, right? Even my friends noticed. Jane said she'd left a message for me about a lunch date. I never got it. Annie must have forgotten to pass it on when Jane called the house. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was strategy. Annie was closing the door between me and my own son and my friends, one polite excuse at a time. The first time they asked for money, it was small, or at least they made it sound that way. Annie called it a short-term loan. Something to tide them over until Alex's next bonus. I didn't think twice, but the money never came back. The first loan was $3,200 for Alex's car repair. The second was $8,500 for Annie's emergency dental work, though her smile looked perfect to me. Then came $12,000 for their investment opportunity. That would double our money in 6 months. By the time I tallied it up, they'd taken $47,000. Small enough amounts that I hadn't noticed the pattern until it was too late. Then came more loan requests. Each request dressed up in some new story. An unexpected bill, a broken appliance, a can't-miss investment. Always urgent. Always with Annie doing most of the talking while Alex sat beside her, nodding like a man reading from a script. One afternoon, I came home early from a doctor's appointment. The house was quiet, too quiet. Then I heard muffled voices from down the hall. I stepped into my office and froze. Alex and Annie were standing at my desk, drawers half open. Annie had my bank statements in her hands. She didn't even flinch. "Oh, Ruth," she said with that syrupy voice. "We were just trying to help you get organized." Alex wouldn't meet my eyes. Something twisted in my stomach then, a knot that told me this wasn't about help. This was about taking. I didn't argue. Didn't shout. I just walked past them, pulled the bank statements gently from Annie's hands, and slid them back into the drawer. Then I locked it. It was the first time I'd ever locked anything in this house. The sound of the key turning seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. Annie gave a little laugh, the kind people give when they think you're overreacting. Alex still wouldn't look at me. I smiled, not a warm smile, but the kind that hides more than it shows, and said, "You'll have to let me know next time you want to help me get organized. I'll make sure I'm home." It was small, almost nothing. But as I put that key in my pocket, I felt something shift. A tiny, stubborn root of self-protection taking hold. It was my mother's locket. The one she wore every day of her life, the one she pressed into my hand at the hospital when she knew she wouldn't be coming home. I kept it in a little wooden box on the bookshelf, right next to the photo of Alex as a boy holding a bouquet of wildflowers for me. One afternoon, I noticed the box was gone. Annie brushed it off with that airy voice of hers. Oh, I thought you didn't wear it anymore. I sold it to a friend who owns a vintage shop. Good price, too. That locket was my mother's dying gift to me, Annie. But I suppose you see dollar signs where other people see love. Later that week, I heard her at the coffee shop on Main Street. I'd stopped in to pick up a loaf of sourdough when I caught her voice floating over the low hum of conversation. Honestly, she's pathetic, Annie said, laughing with someone I didn't recognize. Still clinging to all that old junk like it's worth anything. The woman she was with laughed too. And there was Alex. Standing right there. Not saying a word. I paid for my bread and left without looking at either of them. Outside, the spring air felt sharper than it should have. I walked home slowly, holding the warm loaf against my chest like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I'd heard rumors about Annie's childhood from Alex's casual mentions. Foster care from age 8, bounced between homes until 18. She'd told Alex how she'd watched other kids get adopted while she was left behind. I promised myself I'd never be poor again, she'd once said. Now I understood. This wasn't just greed. This was a woman trying to fill a hole that money couldn't fix. But that didn't make her any less dangerous. It wasn't until the next Sunday that my son and his wife came over on a Sunday afternoon. They were smiling too much. Annie had that syrupy voice she uses when she's about to deliver bad news and pretend it's a gift. We've been thinking, she started, glancing at Alex like they'd rehearsed this. That guest room of yours just sits there. Wouldn't it make more sense for you to downsize? You'd have less to clean, less to worry about. Alex jumped in, nodding. You could move in with us. We'd keep you safe. And, his voice dropped a little, it'd free up some money. We're in the middle of a business opportunity, Mom. It's time-sensitive. Could change everything for us. I sat there, my plate of spaghetti with meatballs cooling in my hands, staring at the place on the wall where my late husband's photo hung. This was the house we built brick by brick, painting the trim ourselves on summer evenings. The house where Alex took his first steps. We're only thinking of you, Annie said, leaning forward, her eyes sharp in a way her smile couldn't hide. I just nodded, murmured something noncommittal, and stood up to refill my plate. But inside, something heavy shifted. I could feel it. They weren't asking. They were circling. Annie had started answering my door for me. She'd pick up my phone when it rang, telling friends I was resting. Last week, she took it from my hands, saying she needed to update the software. I didn't get it back for 2 days. When Jane stopped by, Annie made some excuse about me being busy and closed the door in her face. Jane called me later, voice low and urgent. Ruth, you need to lock your documents away. Your will, your bank statements, everything. I laughed it off, told her. Their family. They'd never. But that night, when the house was quiet, I pulled my file box from the study. I moved the deeds, my will, and the binder with my business sale records into an old cookie tin my husband once used for nails. I tucked it in the back of the pantry, behind the Christmas cake tin. It wasn't much. But it was the first time I'd hidden anything from my son. As Annie started answering my door for friends, I began leaving notes on my porch when I knew Jane was coming. Gone for a walk, meet me at the coffee shop at 2 p.m. Small rebellions, but they reminded me I still had choices. I wasn't as powerless as they wanted me to feel. Then, when Annie tried to update my phone's software again, I was ready. I'd already contacted my phone company and added a security PIN that only I knew. I'm sorry, the representative told Annie when she called, but the account holder has restricted access. You'll need to have Mrs. Carter call us directly. Annie's face went white. For the first time, I'd outmaneuvered her completely. It felt like winning a chess match. I thought hiding those documents was enough. I thought I was finally taking control. But then the letter came, and I realized how little control any of us really have. The letter from Dr. Morrison arrived on a Tuesday morning. Stage 2 ovarian cancer. Treatable, he said, but we needed to move quickly. Surgery scheduled for 3 weeks out, followed by chemotherapy. I stared at the words until they blurred. When I called to tell Alex, Annie answered instead. Oh, Ruth, that's terrible news, she said, but something in her voice sounded almost relieved. You know, this changes everything. You really can't manage that big house during treatment. And all those medical bills. By Thursday, they were at my door with a leather portfolio. "We've talked to a financial advisor," Alex said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The house needs to be transferred now, before the medical expenses eat into your estate. For tax purposes." Alex spread 3 documents across my kitchen table like he was dealing cards. "We've talked to a financial advisor," he said, pointing to the first paper. "This is a revocable living trust. It protects your assets from medical bankruptcy." The second document was thicker. "Durable power of attorney for finances," Annie explained. "Just in case the cancer treatments affect your thinking." The third made my stomach drop. "Deed transfer with life estate," Alex said quickly. "You keep living here, but legal ownership transfers now. Saves on probate taxes." I stared at the pages of legal language, designed to confuse. Annie leaned forward, her voice soft with fake concern. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of, Ruth. But if we wait too long, the government could claim everything. Cancer has a way of clarifying priorities. You won't need a big house where you're going." I felt the walls closing in. Sick, scared, and now being told I had to sign away my life's work or lose it all to medical debt. They'd found the perfect moment to strike, when I was too weak to fight back. I should have known that saying no to them wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something much worse. When I told them I needed time to think about signing the papers, Alex's whole demeanor changed. He stood up slowly from the kitchen table, his 6 feet 2 inches frame casting a shadow over where I sat. He didn't say anything at first, just moved behind my chair and placed his hands on my shoulders. His grip was firm. Too firm. His thumbs pressed into the soft spots just above my collarbones. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice right by my ear, "you don't really have time to think. The surgery is in 3 weeks." I tried to shift away, but his hands held me in place. Not violently, that would come later. Just firmly, like he was reminding me how small I was compared to him. "We're only trying to help," Annie said from across the table, but she was smiling as she watched Alex's hands on my shoulders. When he finally let go, I could feel the heat from his palms lingering on my skin like a brand. I rubbed my shoulders after they left, but the feeling wouldn't go away. There were 2 red marks where his thumbs had pressed. I took a photo with my phone. 40 years of business had taught me to document everything. If this escalated, I'd need proof. Alex's hands on my shoulders reminded me of something my business mentor once said. When someone tries to intimidate you physically, they've already lost the logical argument. That's when I knew they were desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my lawyer. "Joanna," I said when she picked up, "I need to see you. Today." Joanna Gabrego had handled the sale of my bakeries 5 years ago. She was sharp, no nonsense, and she'd always told me to call if I ever had questions about my estate. 2 hours later, I sat in her office, watching her flip through the papers Alex and Annie had brought me. Her expression grew darker with each page. "Ruth," she said finally, "these documents would give them complete control over everything. Your house, your savings, your medical decisions. Everything. But they said it was for tax purposes." "That's nonsense." She leaned forward. "This isn't estate planning. This is theft with paperwork." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Someone with authority was confirming what my gut had been telling me. "I spent 40 years building a business, Joanna. I know the difference between a partnership and a hostile takeover." "What do I do?" I asked. "Nothing. Don't sign anything. And I'm going to draft a letter making it clear that any further pressure constitutes elder abuse." I walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. Finally, someone was on my side. Someone who could fight back. That evening, when Alex and Annie came by to check on me, I was ready. "I spoke with my lawyer today," I said calmly, watching their faces change. She explained what those papers really meant. Annie's smile flickered. Alex's jaw tightened. "She's sending you a letter," I continued, my voice steady as steel. "Turns out there's a name for what you've been doing. Elder abuse. And apparently it's a felony. Any further pressure about my finances will be reported as elder abuse." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Finally, Annie stood up, her voice cold as winter. "Well, Ruth, I hope you know what you're doing. You really thought that lawyer would save you? Oh, Ruth. Some problems require more personal solutions." Alex didn't say anything. He just stared at me with eyes I didn't recognize. After they left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch, watching the sunset. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. I should have known it wouldn't last. I should have known that cornered animals are the most dangerous. 3 days later, they came to collect what they thought they owned. Starting with my dignity. The conversation started like so many before. Annie pacing my kitchen, papers in her hand, Alex hovering near the doorway like a shadow. "It's just a formality," Annie said, sliding the documents across the table. "If you just sign the property over now, it'll save taxes later. For everyone." I pushed the papers back. "No, just that one word. Steady. Final." Alex's jaw tightened. Annie's smile froze into something sharp. "You don't mean that," she said, voice sweet but sour underneath. "You're just confused." "I'm not confused," I said. "I'm not signing." Something in the air shifted. Heavy, sudden, electric. Alex moved first, stepping behind me, his hands clamping hard around my wrists. I could feel the pulse in his palms, fast and angry. "What are you doing?" My voice broke, but he didn't answer. Annie reached into her bag. Metal glinted. The snap-snap of the scissors filled the room, sharp and cold. I twisted, but Alex pinned me harder, my wrists aching under his grip. Annie's face lit with something I'd never seen before, not just cruelty but delight. "Hold her still," she said, almost laughing. The first lock of my hair slid past my cheek, falling to the tile like a dead thing. The smell of my own shampoo, faint lavender, mixed with the metallic tang of the scissors. Snip, snip, snip. "Maybe now," Annie said, her voice low. "You'll look like someone who needs our help." When they finally let me go, the floor around me was littered with pieces of myself. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, hands in my lap, staring at the hair on the floor until it blurred. Alex shoved a pen in front of me. "Sign it." I didn't move. I didn't speak. Something inside me had gone still, the kind of still that comes right before a storm. The papers were still in front of me, edges curling from where Annie's fingers had pressed them into the table. My hair lay scattered on the floor like fallen leaves no one bothered to sweep. "Sign it," she said again, slower this time, like I was a stubborn child. Alex wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the corner of the table, jaw working, knuckles white where they gripped the back of my chair. For a moment, I wondered if he even saw me anymore, or just the asset his wife kept talking about. Annie leaned in, the sharp smell of her perfume making my stomach turn. $17 million in property and accounts, she murmured, almost to herself. And it's just sitting there wasted. We could put it to better use. Better use. I wanted to laugh, but my voice wouldn't come, my throat locked tight. Her hand pressed on the papers, her other hand guiding the pen toward my fingers. "It's for everyone's benefit," she said, her smile thin and cold. Alex's hand touched my shoulder, not gentle, not cruel, just a weight keeping me there. "Just do it, Mom," he said quietly. "No warmth, no fight." I signed. The pen felt heavier than it should have, dragging across the page like it knew it was ending something. Annie's smirk widened as she gathered the papers, sliding them back into her bag with the satisfaction of a thief who knew she'd never be caught. But as they left the kitchen, I kept my eyes on that bag, not on her, not on him. Because somewhere in that moment, under the numbness and the silence, a thought took root. They think this is over. The house was still. I sat at the kitchen table long after their car had pulled away, long after the sound of their voices had faded. My hair clung to my sweater, my lap, the floor, 1,000 tiny reminders scattered around me. The papers were gone. The pen was gone. And the part of me that still believed Alex might come to his senses, gone too. I walked to the bathroom on legs that felt older than they had that morning. The mirror didn't flinch, but I did. Stray strands stuck out where Annie's scissors had bitten deep, the uneven edges catching the light. I touched my hair, then my face. No bruises. No blood. But I'd been cut all the same. The tears came quietly, the kind that don't heave or choke, just slide down until you taste the salt. How could I have raised this? The question wasn't for anyone but me. And yet it hung in the air like an accusation I couldn't answer. I sank to the floor, back against the cold porcelain of the tub, knees pulled in. The silence pressed close. And somewhere in it, I felt something small but steady forming. Not anger. Not yet. Just the understanding that love, the kind I had given freely for decades, could be broken. And once broken, it could be replaced with something else. The knock at the door was sharp, urgent. I almost didn't answer. My hair was a mess of jagged edges, my eyes swollen from a night that hadn't really ended. My first impulse was to pretend I wasn't home. My body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. But then Jane's voice cut through the wood, low, worried. "Ruth, it's me." When I opened the door just enough to see her face, Jane's smile faltered instantly. Her eyes darted from my hair to the empty coffee table where papers used to sit. The way you scan the aftermath of an accident, not knowing where to look first. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Her gaze landed on the floor, where strands of my hair clung stubbornly to the carpet. Then to my sweater, more hair there. Finally to the coffee table, now bare except for a ring of cold tea. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "Oh my God, what did they do to you?" I tried to shrug it off, but the lump in my throat made even that small lie impossible. So I tried for a laugh, something light, but it broke halfway out. "It's fine. It's done." Her eyes flashed, scanning me like she was counting injuries. "No, it's not fine. Ruth, this is assault. We're going to the police." I shook my head. "I can't. He's still my son." The words tasted sour, like I was reciting something I didn't believe anymore. Jane stood in the center of my living room, arms crossed tight. She didn't rush her reply. "No, Ruth. He was your son. That boy you raised. He wouldn't have stood there and let this happen. You know that. What's standing in front of you now? That's someone else. And she's driving him." I sank into the couch. The silence between us stretched, filling the room until it felt heavy. Jane paced, hands flexing. Then her voice softened. "If you don't stop them now, they'll come back for whatever's left. You know that." Her certainty settled in me like a weight, but a steady one, something I could brace against. I looked down at the scattered strands still clinging to my sweater, then back at her. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "They've had the last laugh they'll ever get." I sat at the kitchen table long after Jane left for her car to fetch something. The steam from my tea curled upward, disappearing before it reached my face. My hands were still. My breath was steady. I may have lost my hair, but I hadn't lost my fight. The phone sat in front of me like a sleeping animal. I touched it once, then pulled my hand back. When I finally picked it up, I didn't scroll through contacts. I knew exactly which number to press. "Law Office of Joanna Gabrego," a clipped voice answered. "It's Ruth," I said quietly, my voice low enough that even the walls couldn't overhear. There was a pause, then her voice, calm, precise. "Tell me everything." I spoke in measured pieces, giving her the facts like stones placed one by one on a scale. No embellishment. No anger. Just the truth. When I reached the part about the scissors, her voice changed. "That's duress, Ruth. And if we add the transfer of property, the value involved, we're looking at elder financial abuse. Potential felony charges." The words settled between us, heavier than anything I'd heard all week. "Can we prove it?" I asked. "Not yet," he replied. "But if you're willing, we can." The click of my front door broke the stillness. Jane returned, her coat still on, eyes sharp with purpose. She slid something small across the table toward me, a sleek black recorder no bigger than a matchbox. "They're greedy," she said. "Greedy people talk. We just need to make sure they do it while this is running." I didn't smile, but I felt the corner of my mouth lift, just barely. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't picturing the past. I was picturing the next move. 2 days later, I invited them over. Not for a talk. Not for an apology. For lunch. The trick with greedy people is you don't push them. You let them walk right into the open trap. The recorder was tucked inside a porcelain sugar bowl on the table, its tiny red light hidden beneath a blanket of cubes. When they arrived, Jane greeted them at the door, warm as ever, even taking their coats. Annie breezed in first, perfume sharp and sweet with false concern. "How's your head?" she asked, eyes grazing my cropped hair before scanning the house like she was already cataloging what to take next. Alex followed slower, avoiding my gaze like the last time. He mumbled hello, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Her eyes tracked Jane like a cat on a mouse as she led them toward the kitchen. Annie's smile faltered. "Can we just have a little privacy?" she said lightly. Before I could answer, she crossed the floor and closed the kitchen door herself. She thought she'd locked Jane out. She didn't know Jane was on the other side, phone recording, ear pressed to the wood. We sat. I plated them some golden fried chicken with buttery mashed potatoes, steam curling up like a warm invitation. The kind of meal that makes even the coldest people linger. I made small talk about the weather, about the rising price of eggs. It was nothing, meaningless chatter. But I watched the way Annie's eyes narrowed each time I mentioned money. Then I let the bait drop, casual as if I were swatting away a fly. "I've been thinking, maybe you're right," I said to my plate. "Right about what?" Annie asked too quickly. "About the house. It's too much for me. Maybe I should sell sooner rather than later. Get the money while the market's good." I didn't look up. Didn't give away the tremor of satisfaction in my chest when I heard the chair legs scrape as she leaned in. "Well," she said, her voice syrupy, "if you're serious, we'd need to act fast. That business deal we mentioned, the window's closing." Alex cleared his throat. "Yeah, Mom. It would really help." Her words were sharp enough to cut, but I let them sit in the air, knowing the recorder was catching every syllable. Inside, I felt the faint hum of something I hadn't felt in months. Control. Annie leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice dropping into that sweet tone she always used before making a demand. "Ruth, we just want what's best for you. Why keep this big old house when you could be with us? Safe. Looked after." Alex echoed her like he'd practiced in the mirror. "It's not about the money, Mom. It's about family." I kept my head down, cutting into my fried chicken, as if their words were just another sound in the kitchen, like the hum of the fridge. "Thing is," I said softly, "I don't think I ever really understood what I signed the other day. Could you walk me through it again? Just so I'm clear." I saw Annie's smile twitch. Alex's shoulders loosened. They thought they had me. I slid the gravy boat across the table. "Why don't you tell me again, exactly what you made me sign the other day?" Annie didn't notice the way my eyes flicked toward the kitchen door. On the other side of that door, Jane didn't move. She didn't hear Jane's breathing just inches away. She didn't notice the silence I left hanging, the kind that makes people talk too much. Every word from here on out would be theirs, and the laws. She only saw an old woman folding, and she kept talking. Annie's smile spread like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. Then she launched into her version of helping me. "Well, you signed over the investment portfolio. And the account authorizations. And," she waved her fork, casual as tossing crumbs to a bird, "the property deed addendum, remember? So now we can move forward without all that red tape." I kept my gaze on my plate, chewing slowly. "And I did that because—" Her tone stayed sweet. "Because we told you it would be safer in our name. You know, in case something happened to you." She chuckled lightly, like it was all a funny family misunderstanding. Alex shifted in his seat. "It's just temporary, Mom. Until the business deal closes," Annie added, almost on top of him. "Once the funds clear, we can pay off our debts and then, well, we'll see about transferring things back." I let my fork rest against the plate, the faint clink sounding louder than it should. "Interesting," I murmured. "And when you had me sign, I didn't get to read it all, did I?" Annie laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, Ruth, you'd still be reading if we let you. We just told you where to sign so you wouldn't get overwhelmed." Alex chuckled along. "It was for your own good, Mom." Every word felt like a knife. But I kept my face soft, my voice low, my hand steady on the knife and fork. Annie leaned forward. "You trust us, don't you?" Her nails tapped the table in an impatient little rhythm. You wouldn't want us to get in trouble over a piece of paper. Behind the kitchen door, Jane's breathing slowed. She knew what I knew. They'd just said enough. Enough to prove coercion. Enough to prove intent. When Annie finally leaned back, satisfied, I let a silence hang between us, the kind that makes people keep talking. She filled it with more justifications. How I owed it to family, how people my age shouldn't be dealing with big assets. Alex nodded along, every another nail in their own coffin. I topped off their sweet tea and smiled faintly. I'm so glad we had this talk, I said, dabbing my lips with my napkin. Not too much. Just enough to make Annie tilt her head, sensing something but not sure what. They thought I meant it. But in my chest, beneath the calm mask, something long buried was stretching awake. I wasn't just holding the knife and fork. I was holding every ounce of control they thought they'd taken from me. They didn't know the conversation was already sealed in a file. And soon so was their fate. When the plates were cleared and the last crumbs of cornbread swept away, Annie and Alex didn't rush to leave. They lounged in my kitchen like they owned the air itself, Annie twirling her glass, Alex scrolling his phone between half-hearted comments about getting this all wrapped up. I nodded at the right moments, kept my eyes soft. Inside, my heartbeat was steady, slow. Like I was walking a rope bridge I'd crossed 100 times before. On the other side of the kitchen door, Jane's hand finally left the wood. She'd gotten everything, every smug word, every accidental admission. She slipped out through the side hall, her footsteps muffled by the old rug. By the time Annie glanced toward the door, Jane was gone. "Where's your friend?" Annie asked. I feigned surprise. Oh, she had to step out early. I saw it, the faintest flicker of relief across her face. Relief that she thought Jane hadn't heard a thing. We moved back to the living room. Annie chattered about when you're with us, and the new place, but I barely listened. My mind was already with Jane, with the audio file that was now more valuable than anything they thought they'd stolen. I had a backup in my kitchen, from the recorder hidden in the porcelain sugar bowl. Later that evening, Jane and I sat at her dining table, mugs of tea between us. The glow from her laptop cast her face in warm light as she clicked play. Our own voices filled the room, layered with the quiet hum of the fridge and the scrape of chairs. Annie's words, her own words, crisp and clear as glass. When the clip ended, Jane looked at me. "You know we've got them, right?" I leaned back, letting the quiet stretch. "Oh, I know," I said. "Now we just decide how to use it." 3 days later, I called Annie. I told her I'd been thinking again. That maybe it was time to make things official. I let my voice sound smaller than it was. She took the bait in under a heartbeat. "We'll come by Friday," she said, her excitement leaking through. What she didn't know was that Friday wouldn't just be her big day. It would be mine. Jane came over early that morning. She didn't ask if I was sure. She could see it in my eyes, the same way she saw it the day I told her we'd set the trap. We moved the coffee table against the far wall, so the center of the living room was open. I set out 3 chairs for them, 1 for me, and 2 more in the corner for friends I said might stop by. Those friends were already in the loop. One was Margaret from church, the one Annie always sucked up to during bake sales. The other was Mr. Lewis, my neighbor, who had been on the receiving end of Annie's false complaints more than once. They were only here for one reason: to watch. And then there were the real guests, the 2 uniformed officers who waited quietly in Jane's car down the street. When the knock came, Jane was in the kitchen making tea she didn't intend to serve. I opened the door. Annie swept in, smelling like money she didn't have. Alex followed, a little more confident than before. He believed today was the day they'd finish what they started. "I brought the deed transfer," Annie said, tapping her bag like it was a treasure chest. "We'll just need your signature and—" "Oh," I said, stepping aside. "We'll get to that." Her eyes darted to the chairs, and the people in them. "What's this?" "Witnesses," I said simply. Margaret gave her a polite little wave. Mr. Lewis didn't bother. And next to him Joanna, my lawyer, in a charcoal suit, pen poised over her notepad. Annie's smile tightened. "You didn't say anyone else would be here." "I wanted to make sure everything was above board." Alex's gaze snagged on Joanna. I saw the flicker of recognition, the subtle tightening of his jaw. He knew her. He knew her reputation. And for a split second, the confidence in his eyes thinned to caution. "That's Joanna Gabrego," he murmured under his breath to Annie. I caught it. So did Joanna. She didn't even look up, just made another neat note on her pad. That was the first crack. The second came when I picked up the porcelain sugar bowl from the table, set it in my lap, and turned the lid just enough for the tiny red light to glow. "You remember this?" I asked, my voice even. "You should. It recorded our last little lunch." Alex frowned. Annie blinked fast. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I just pressed play. Her voice filled the room, sweet and poisonous. Alex's followed, lower, full of agreement. They spoke of the house, of safety, of how they'd get it back to me eventually. Every word dripped with intent. Every sentence was a confession. When the clip ended, Annie's laugh came out brittle. "Honestly, Ruth, you've taken this all out of context. We shouldn't drag this out in front of your friends." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Well, if that's all, we should get going. Come on, Alex. Let's go. Big day ahead. Ruth, we'll give you time to think. You'll come around." Smooth as glass, Annie was already turning toward the door. Alex hesitated, but followed her lead. The two of them heading toward the door like this was just another petty argument they'd won. For a second, I let them believe it. I even stepped aside, as though I were letting them pass. Annie's hand closed over the doorknob, that smug little smile back in place. Her perfume trailing behind her like the last puff of smoke from a dying fire. Then Joanna's voice cut the air like a blade. She'd been silent until now, leaning casually against the wall, a folder in hand. "Before you go, there's someone outside who'd like a word." Annie froze, hand still on the doorknob, her smile faltering just enough to show the truth underneath. "What do you mean?" The answer came in the form of two uniformed figures stepping into view as the door opened. The color drained from Alex's face the second he recognized the badge. The officers stepped in like they belonged there. The taller one's voice cut through the room. "Annie Rogers, Alex Rogers, you're under arrest for elder financial abuse and fraud. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." Annie half turned with mouth opened, but no sound came. Alex's face went white. "This is a mistake." Annie's hand slipped from the knob. She looked at me, searching for some last scrap of control. But all she found was my calm, steady gaze. The rug was gone. The floor was gone. All that was left was the drop. The handcuffs clicked with finality. Alex shot to his feet. "You can't." The second officer had cuffs out before he finished the sentence. I watched my son's hands disappear behind his back, heard the metal click of the cuffs, and felt something break inside me. Not my heart this time, the last chain that bound me to who I used to be. The woman who would have begged them to stop, who would have protected him even now. She was gone. In her place stood someone I was finally proud to be. Margaret stood. Mr. Lewis folded his arms. Neither said a word. They didn't need to. Annie's voice rose, all pretense gone. "Ruth, tell them this isn't what it looks like." I held her gaze steady and cold. "It's exactly what it looks like." The officers led them toward the door. As it swung open, the soft murmur of voices drifted in. "Neighbors." Mrs. Cartwright from across the street stood on her porch in her housecoat, arms crossed, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Two teenagers leaned on their bikes at the curb, whispering. Curtains twitched up and down the block. By the time they reached the hydrangeas, a small knot of people had gathered, some curious, some openly delighted. Margaret stepped out behind us, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. "About time." Annie caught sight of the audience as the officers guided her toward the cruiser. She tried to yank her arm free, tossing her hair back like she could still salvage some dignity. But the handcuffs glinted in the afternoon light, and no amount of posing could hide them. Alex kept his head down, jaw tight. For a moment, I almost wondered if he understood now what he'd thrown away. Almost. The officers walked them past the hedges and into the waiting cruiser, their protests fading into the afternoon air. When the car doors shut and the cruiser rolled away, Jane closed the door, shutting out the noise. The house was quiet. I walked to my kitchen table and sat down, running my fingers over the wood David and I had chosen together 40 years ago. The same table where they'd spread their papers, where they'd cut my hair, where I'd signed away everything I'd worked for, but also where I'd planned their downfall. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in the silence. Not the heavy, fearful silence of the past months, but something clean and light. The quiet of a house that belonged to me again. Outside, spring was turning toward summer. Inside, I was finally free. For 40 years, I'd built something from nothing. And when someone tried to take it away, I'd done what I did best. I'd outworked them, outsmarted them, and outlasted them. I'd forgotten, for a while, what I was capable of. They'd helped me remember. And that, I realized, was the last gift my son would ever give me. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and paper, the kind of clean, serious scent that made you sit straighter. I took the stand. My hands rested in my lap, still steady. I spoke in my own words, not rehearsed, not dramatic, just the truth. I told them how my son and daughter-in-law had come to my home, cut my hair without my consent, pressured me to sign papers I didn't understand, and whispered about family while planning to take everything I had left. I told them about the lunch, the sugar bowl recorder, and the sting in my living room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The jury leaned in, each of them catching the weight of every word. From the corner of my eye, I saw Alex. At first, he tried to keep that practiced mask, the one that said Mom's overreacting. But as the evidence played and the photographs were passed down the line, his shoulders curled in, like a boy who'd just realized the ground wasn't solid under his feet. When the recording played, he looked at me, not defiant this time, but with a hollow, sinking recognition. He knew he'd walked straight into the trap. Annie didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed forward, cold as glass, hands folded on the table like this was a business meeting. The judge's voice cut through the room. Guilty on all counts. There it was. The gavel came down. Assets returned. Restraining order granted. The court awarded me full restitution, every cent they had taken, and then some. Annie was banned from contacting me for the rest of her life. Alex put his head in his hands. Annie didn't move. I stood, thanked the judge, and walked past them without a word. For the first time in months, my steps felt light. The house felt different now. Lighter. The air didn't carry that weight anymore. I stood at the kitchen counter, sunlight spilling through the window. It had been 3 months since the trial. 3 months since the arrests, the verdict, and the last time I'd heard their voices. The doctors had gone in, done the surgery, and when the results came back, they used the word I'd been too afraid to hope for: remission. I ran a hand over my short hair. It wasn't the hacked, uneven cut they'd given me that awful day. This was mine. Chosen. Styled. It was still new, still strange to see in the mirror. But the woman staring back looked stronger than I'd ever seen her. Jane knocked on the back door before letting herself in, the way she always had. She brought a bag of oranges, said they were full of the good stuff. We sat in the living room with tea and talked about everything but the trial. We laughed. Really laughed. When she left, I stayed by the window for a long while, watching her walk down the path. The hydrangeas were blooming again. Never let anyone dim your light, even if they share your blood. If you take anything from my story today, let it be this: love your family, but never at the cost of your dignity. If this story moved you, if it sparked memories of someone you're fighting for, or someone you finally found the courage to stand up to, then take a second. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. And drop a comment below. I read every one. This is a space where your voice matters. If you want more true stories about the breaking points that change everything, hit the subscribe to our channel Betty's Stories and turn on notifications. More stories are coming. Because in a world that tries to silence the betrayed, sharing your story is an act of courage.